Welcome back, everyone. I'm really thrilled that you're with us on 33 Founders today because I'm here with Adam Besvinick, investor at Deep4 Capital. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Adam, I want to rewind back to 2011 to the beginning of your journey in startups and VCs. You've made many stops on the road to Deep4. Can you highlight a couple of those?
Yeah, I'd say the most sort of influential and the sort of the turning point for me was getting the chance to work with Chris Sacca at Lowercase. I sent Chris a totally cold email, actually like over 4 years ago now, before in the spring before I headed back to business school. And I don't know why or how he decided to reply to it. It was, like I said, it's terribly written. It was just way too long. It violated every rule that I give to people who ask me for advice on how to write good cold emails. But Chris replied, and I was able to kind of strike up an email dialogue with him. And then I like to say it was diligent follow up. It might have come across as annoying at times, but just staying in touch with him over the course of the next several months. I would send him blog posts I wrote that I thought were relevant to portfolio companies of his, or sort of general ideas that I saw him tweet about or comment on. Would just stay constantly present in his Twitter feed, replying to things that he said. Sometimes he would favorite them, other times I would just go unnoticed. But was able to start working with him in the fall of 2011 once I got back to business school. He had reached out to me about an opportunity with one of his portfolio companies, and I jumped at the chance to get to work with him. And honestly, he said he read my tweets and blog posts, and that was like the reference check he did on me. There was no interview. It was just, I've seen what you've shared online, and any question I could ask is going to be answered by something you've tweeted about or something you've blogged about. So let's just go with a trial run here and see how it works.
And he emailed you right during midterms, right?
Yeah, I was in the middle of a meeting and got an email from Chris that said, like basically said, hey dude, sorry this email's out of the blue and I've been out of touch, but I have a portfolio company that I think you could be helpful with. And I was in the middle of midterms, my first year of business school, and I was like, yeah, those are definitely going to,
perfect timing.
Yeah, those are definitely going to be a second priority to get a chance to work with Chris and get to learn from him. So, it was a really critical moment in terms of validating sort of the work that I've been doing up until that point, and then certainly validating like myself when talking to companies, funds, etc. thereafter. So,
what do you admire most about Chris?
I think it's probably just a combination of like restraint around what to invest in. He said this recently a bunch, just sort of only investing in things where he can really significantly move the needle and sort of treat that as a competitive advantage, and then investing in things that he knows he can certainly be proud of. So like, I can't think of an example he gave off the top of his head, but like not investing in something where when his daughters ask him how he earns a living and makes money, like investing, I think the example he gave was Whisper, sort of the earliest days, where there was a lot of like bullying and sort of shaming through like this anonymous channel, and obviously that's been toned down on that platform since. But in the earliest days, his feeling like I couldn't properly invest in this and feel like good about making that investment. And I'd say the other thing is he frankly he makes decisions and investment choices and states his mind without feeling necessarily like without feeling like he's being judged totally. I'd say everyone respects the decisions he's made. Everyone might not be Chris's biggest. Everyone might not be a fan of his, but everyone respects like the hustle and his determination as an investor and the success he's had. And so sort of, you can't be everyone's best friend, but if you can garner everyone's respect, I think that's sort of like the ultimate like accomplishment, especially like in the competitive field.
Emily Chang over at Bloomberg had a great interview with him a few months back, and I want to ask a question to you that she asked him. She said, what's the myth of Chris Sacca and what's the reality?
I do remember watching that. I don't know what necessarily maybe the myth might be that He's super brash and um, like doesn't care about like people's opinions of him. Um, it's hard for me to say whether he does or doesn't, but I think like that's the perception is like sort of this like renegade like seed investor, if that can even be a thing. But the times that I've only gotten to meet Chris twice in person, which is kind of like one of the funniest things about sort of the way that the way the internet connects people and allows them to work together remotely. But has always been incredibly helpful to me and has always been sort of a really strong advocate for anything that I've been working on, an insanely valuable reference for any company, fund, whoever I was chatting with at the time. And so like, I like to say that I got way more out of that relationship than he ever did. Um, that was just a certainly invaluable experience and opportunity, and sort of without that, I could argue like I probably wouldn't have been able to reach like the point I am right now without having the chance to work with him. So
When you guys did meet for the first time in March 2012, what was that like?
um, honestly, like pretty normal. Like we've been chatting on the phone and email and Twitter for at that point like I guess I emailed him in March of 2011, like the very first time, cold, and then started working with him in October. And so at that point, I've been working with him like pretty closely for 6 months, like sending him emails every week, updates on the projects I was working on, things like that. And so at that point, like it was pretty natural, and there was like we had sort of an agenda to like accomplish. Like I was trying to figure out what to do that summer, um, and so had a few options we were considering, and he gave me a ton of great advice and got to spend a couple hours with him, and um, you know both hear sort of all of what he learned about working at Google and in the Valley, and sort of his like rationale for like kind of extracting himself from like the hype and buzz of San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and sort of removing himself there to get kind of like a better perspective on the landscape, um, and then also getting the chance to get his advice on what I should do that summer, and what portfolio company I could go to, who I could learn the most from, and that's how I ended up at Gumroad.
What was that experience like?
Working at Gumroad was phenomenal. I mean, I was 24 when I started working with those guys, and Sahil was 19, which I felt like a grandfather or something.
Sahil's a powerhouse, though.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that he's done an amazing job of growing that company, and he's certainly grown into the role as CEO. I think like there was no doubt that he was the sole founder of the company, but I think there's a very distinct difference between being a founder and being a CEO. And I think that he's definitely grown into that over the last 3+ years of leading Gumroad. But getting to work with a team of 4 or 5 people out of his kitchen in Soma for 3 months that summer, and then I worked part-time in the spring leading up to it and the fall afterwards, and making trips down to LA and up to New York to convince management companies and labels and talent agencies that they should take a chance on this company that they had never heard of, was always an interesting challenge. But I think that summer was sort of basically me applying all the cold emailing skills, if you want to call it that I had used to like sell myself, and then working with in conjunction with Ryan Delk over at Gumroad during that time to like kind of cold email and sell like ourselves and Gumroad into these into these content creators. So it turned out to be like a directly relevant experience.
Something that I really admire about you, Adam, is you were just saying that the influence that Chris had just from responding to your cold email has been huge on your career where you are today. And in one of your blogs, you have a great quote saying that relationships matter. You never know when you're going to meet someone, and that today, provided that you have time, you take every meeting that you can to meet someone, regardless of whether or not you can invest, even just to help them. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the seed stage, well, it's a combination of two things. One, it's the fact that so many people like were able to help me. And so I feel like this obligation to pay it forward to the next, group of students or people who are making a transition from another career into tech, because I know that oftentimes, like, this world can kind of seem like a black box to people on the outside. And so I felt like once you got on the inside, once you met a few people, it became like very welcoming and sort of a very open environment. But it takes a couple coffee meetings or it takes a couple rejections to figure out how to like work your way into it. And then secondly, I think from a seed stage perspective, I never know where our next investment is going to come from. I never know, certainly there's certain hubs. Like you can always go to a demo day and see new companies that are launching or raising money, or you can talk to other funds to see what companies they're looking at, and you might exchange notes and share investment opportunities with them. But there's always the offhand chance that you get introduced to a company through someone who randomly cold emails you and asks for coffee, or you meet a company because a friend from undergrad knows that you're in VC, and they have a friend from home who is starting something, and they want to introduce you. And if I think about of the 9 investments I've now sourced for Deep Fork, I think at least three of them are kind of sort of these offhanded,
oh wow,
like sort of random occurrences, or I can track them back to a random occurrence. So we led an investment in a company here in New York. It's unannounced, but I got introduced through a friend who was an angel investor in the company, and I met that angel investor when he was in the summer of 2011 through a random email, and that I randomly emailed him. And so you never know, sort of, I've maintained that relationship, and he's now the founder of a company, and it's 3 companies later for him. And so I've maintained that relationship over the course of the last 4 years, and it led to an investment. And I think that, I didn't know that's what was going to happen, but I think, nurturing relationships, and staying in touch with people and being helpful in every possible time you can, even if it's something little, goes a long way, particularly in such a tight-knit environment like, the New York startup ecosystem in Silicon Valley. Like, for the most part, everyone is 1 degree away from everyone else. And so the more you can be helpful, the more opportunities you set yourself up for.
When it comes to making those investments, you've mentioned before we started recording in a blog post that you really look for founders who are just ingrained in the problem. You cite Sahil as an example of having a symbiotic relationship between the founder and the product. Can you explain that?
Sometimes you can't, actually. I think with some of the enterprise sort of B2B investments we've made, so I think of like Transfix, which is a marketplace for connecting shippers and carriers. It's an automated freight broker. Drew McElroy, who's the CEO, is sort of, he's just a trucker. Like he comes from the trucking industry. He can talk like a trucker. He can ingrain himself into that world. He could walk up to a truck stop and pitch his company in 2 seconds and get a driver onto the platform. He's not the Silicon Valley or techie guy, stereotypical guy in a hoodie who wants to disrupt an industry for the sake of disrupting it. He just knew the problem through and through and felt like it could be done better, and has synced up with a phenomenal CTO, and they're building an awesome company right now here in New York. That's an easy one for us because it's such direct, relevant experience to the problem they're now solving. With some of the consumer social opportunities, I think it's a little trickier. And Sahil was scratching his own itch. He's written about how like he wanted to sell this this pencil icon that he designed, but there was no great way for him to sell it, so he built the platform to sell it. Working with Dina at Wanilo, I think, is kind of an interesting example because she said how she was sort of scratching her own itch in terms of discovering new products in stores. But if I think about the way that the software looks and feels and the aesthetic and the design and even down to the release notes, that's just her personality shining through the product. And there's just like this weird embodiment
Is this Dina?
of her. Yeah, like and I think that's just a testament to the company and the culture and the community that she and that team have built. I mean, I think like the paradigmatic example that I don't know if I said it in the blog post, but I definitely think about a lot is Dennis Crowley and Foursquare, where like his personality is that product. Like he's a sociable, outgoing, friendly guy, and like that's a huge part of like what that product was all about, especially in its earliest days, was like checking in and letting your friends know where you were and meeting up on like out in the city on the fly. And I think like those are the type of social sort of matches between like a founder and a product that you kind of just know it when you see it. It's fairly subjective, and so I think it's a skill and a pattern that you refine over time. I don't know David Karp, but I feel like that's probably something that those investors in Tumblr saw early on, was just a really strong connection between David and that early community of Tumblr blogs and the product and community that he was trying to cultivate.
Each of those examples lends to an insight you've shared that your favorite meetings as an investor is when you're sitting with someone and all of a sudden you think, hey, I've got to up my game. So the startups that you're partner with are making you a stronger investor. What's an example of that?
We have one company that isn't announced yet, but it's an NLP for analytics space, and they're focused on the sports vertical to start. And we led that investment earlier this year, and I remember I got connected to those guys through someone I met on Twitter actually, and so another example to sort of the serendipitous nature of some of our investments in sourcing. And I remember meeting with those guys, having a call for the first time, and then meeting them, and a lot of the tech that they were building was way over my head, but the application of that technology was something that like I had been looking for and wanting to use just as a consumer for a long time. And it's always great when the excitement of a founder just kind of like through osmosis like enters you, and you just become equally as excited about the opportunity that they're building, to the point like I think Bijan at Spark has mentioned this, where like the ultimate signal for him to invest is when he wants to join that team and build that thing. And so when you start running through all the different things that the product can ultimately do and all the different applications for it and all the different biz dev opportunities and partnership initiatives they could do, and you feel like you're just like getting carried away by the conversation, I think those are the best meetings, where it's it's never great, just like any interview, it's never great when like it's just a litany of a list of questions that the person wants to ask, but it's a conversation, and the interviewer is like, I'm going to pull on this thread because you mentioned something that I totally hadn't thought of. And the same thing with a pitch meeting. A founder might say something that I never expected to hear, and so that's going to route me to another question where before I may have had a whole list that I wanted to run through and think about, but it ends up just being a conversation dialogue purely about the space that they're operating in, the company, and who they are as a person, rather than just like what their metrics are, what the milestones are trying to hit, and sort of the more standard questions that oftentimes you end up running through.
I love that you mentioned that, because I feel like the way that you guys work at Deep Fork, and from what I've read from you, is really against that standard protocol. You love playing hands-on roles with the startups that you're working with and being a part of this. You mentioned a lot of that in your Founder Feud post. Can you explain that and how you're there at every end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I think I like to say that we want to be on call for founders. Like if I had a beeper, like if this were like the mid '90s, I'd have a beeper for a founder to like page me if they needed something. Like I never want to feel like we're not accessible for any question, big or small, or any problem or something. It could be super minor, or it could be as major as some of the stuff that I outlined in that blog post. Like I'm always a text away from jumping on a quick call. And I think that's the one thing that any founder that we invest in or considering investing in, like that's the one thing that I always want them to know. And I always would say we want to get our hands as dirty as founders want us to. And so at Gumroad, it was 4 of us, 5 of us when I was there. And so there was no product manager. I mean, Sahil was CEO and like head of design and head of product, but like there were no PMs. There was no like sales really. There was no marketing. There was no PR. There was no communication team. It was like me and Ryan and I were the only two non-technical people that were there. So we were doing everything and anything and everything we could to like move the product forward. And that's sort of like how hands-on like I want to be able to get if a founder needs us to. And we have a portfolio company that's still just 2 co-founders, and I see them every month in San Francisco. When I'm out there, I'm texting them multiple times a week. I was a user of the product before we invested in it, and so I've seen sort of from basically day 3 of the product till now, and so I love being sort of like that extra like employee that they can spitball ideas off of and think through branding and think through design things. And I talk to users in the product all the time and get feedback, and that's the type of stuff that I love doing, and I try and do my best to scale it across as many portfolio companies as we have. Ultimately we think that sort of our network becomes our founders network. So to the extent that we can be helpful with introductions to other investors in this current raise or beyond, new hires, biz dev partnerships, especially when it comes to content or commerce, given the experiences I had at Gumroad and Munilo, that's sort of like the easy stuff we can do.
You can just start going by Dr. Adam, the investor who's on call. It just made your new tagline.
Honestly, I think that it's a two-way relationship between investor and founder, and so we're constantly thinking about ways that we can be helpful. And so, I just thought of a new potential partnership for this company. Let me ping them and see if they want an intro. But a lot of times we want the company to reach out to us and give us homework to do too, and say, hey, can you guys put us in touch with X person at Nike? I saw that you're connected to 4 people there on LinkedIn. Can you see if you can get us in front of get our product in front of them for some reason? And so, I hadn't even thought that you would want to talk to them. Sure, and so sort of the proactive nature, we think can definitely go both ways, and we want to be receptive to that.
Love it. And one of the areas you guys have been focusing on lately is VR within investment in Wemo Labs. Can you tell us about what you're learning there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning how complex this ecosystem is right now. Headset manufacturers, content creators, distribution platforms that will sit between the creators and the headset makers. I'm seeing app stores for VR in VR, which was kind of meta and weird. Seeing all sorts of different takes on how to create content for VR. I'm looking at a marketplace for creators to get their content funded, and then VR is a potential distribution channel for it. And so
it's crazy that you're even saying that.
It's a really I think what I'm learning the most is just how much the landscape is constantly shifting in the sector, and how some companies are competitors, some aren't competitors, some will become competitors. No one really knows, if you're in the software, hardware is totally separate. But if you're in the software side of VR, it's a really complex environment right now. And I think we're still kind of I in particular, am trying to get my head wrapped around sort of all the different layers. And so looking at everyone in this like VR stack, if you will, from the distribution platforms to discovery of content to content creators themselves. And so that's sort of and then also use cases for VR. And so looking at companies that are like focused on education use cases for virtual reality, like language learning in VR. travel use cases, healthcare. And so those are all like different buckets, but are all directly related to this sort of VR content space. Um, I think we were fortunate to see Weaver pretty early, and so Wemo, now Weaver, and so they're sort of this like content, like they're sort of in this platform space, helping distribution, and then also working with content creators. But then there's this whole other layer of content itself, and now spending more time kind of figuring out who those creators are, what content is uniquely built for VR that can't be built for another platform. The analogy that I've been trying to make recently is that a lot of creators in film were making movies in 3D just because they felt like they should try to. But not every movie should or needs to be in 3D. In fact, most don't really. They just force a scene in there to make it look cool. A lot of the content that I was initially seeing in VR was, oh, we're going to put this in VR because we can. And it wasn't really making use of the medium that effectively. It was just kind of jamming content into an immersive environment. But I was meeting with someone in LA last week, and she had a phenomenal idea that, you know, the storytelling should be focused and changed because it's in VR. So, for instance, it's a murder mystery, and you're in a 360 environment, and if you don't happen to turn over your shoulder at the right time, you might miss a clue, and so, or you might miss, part of the story. And so it's kind of this interesting mix to like choose your own adventure and mystery because you didn't see the clue in the previous scene.
That's crazy.
And so, like, I think that's the really unique stuff that's going to start to emerge, where you're going to see creators who might be terrible at creating for film or television, but they may be amazing at actually creating screenplays for virtual reality because their mind just works in a different way. I think that's the stuff that super early days, but I think we're going to start to see. That's when I think VR will have a tipping point, when you see content that, if it's not seen in VR, it's not even worth watching.
Okay, I'm going to expect a blog post on that soon. That's the next one. I nominated.
That's my homework.
That's your homework.
Right from you? Okay.
I want to spend the last couple of minutes, Adam, just chatting about you outside of your direct role. If you were on the other end of things and you were a startup founder, what startup would you want to have?
If I had the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be doing that. Actually, a lot of people ask me if I'll ever go back to the startup side, and the quick answer I give is the only way I'll go to a startup is if I have an idea that I just can't, I can't not think about. Part of what I love about venture is being exposed to so many different personalities of founders, so many types of ideas, so many different sectors. I think I'm like a startup junkie at heart, and so going into one company and pigeonholing myself into one vertical isn't necessarily what would make me the happiest. Getting to see tons of companies in tons of sectors is one of my favorite parts of this job. However, if there was an idea that was just nagging on me so much that I just had to build it, then I would go and do it. But that idea has not struck me yet. So for now, I'll just continue to support and root for the founders that we're backing.
Sounds like a plan. You recently tweeted asking which company people would choose if they could only choose one, and you said Snapchat at 16 billion, Airbnb at 25 billion, and Twitter at 21 billion. Everyone chose Twitter. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, that was an interesting poll. I think Twitter won, but it might have been biased because I asked it on Twitter. Airbnb had definitely had a ton of votes. I don't know. I'm a shareholder in Twitter, not that significant, but I'm still long Twitter. I bought more Twitter stock when it dipped most recently, and I was hoping it would find a floor, but I don't think it has. I don't know. Twitter. My heart is with Twitter, but I think my head is with Airbnb. If I think which of those, and honestly, I still love Snapchat too. But if I think if I think the race is to $100 billion company, which one has the best chance of getting there soonest or most likely? I think it's Airbnb. I think Twitter is a phenomenal company, and that product will continue to evolve. And I think I tweeted at someone also that like they asked about people leaving the company, and I said all the people that need to be there and believe in the product are still running the show there and building that company and that product. And I think I've gotten to spend a little bit of time with Kevin Wheel briefly and Adam Bain, and those guys are amazing. And I think that they have the right team in place to take this company back to $70 a share when it popped after its IPO, and build a phenomenal product and recruit amazing talent to join them on sort of like this sort of like recovery. But I think Airbnb just has like the reach of that company. I think is going to be really phenomenal. It obviously is totally changing the way that people make a living and income, and the way people travel. They just launched Airbnb for business, which I heard someone tweet about and said like they thought that was you could rent a business for a weekend, which I thought was pretty funny. But I think like you're seeing a shift in corporate travel to Airbnb, just like you saw that in Uber, like so an increasing amount of corporate travelers using that service because it's more efficient, it's better a lot of times, it's less expensive a lot of times as well. I also think the reach of Airbnb from like a local perspective is going to be really amazing. Like they launched the neighborhoods product a really long time ago. But like the idea that when I go to an Airbnb in like Santiago, Chile, like why shouldn't I be able to learn about that, all the different local like merchants, restaurants, stores, vendors on the Airbnb platform? Why should I have to go to Foursquare, or why should I have to like use TripAdvisor? Like why shouldn't that all live there? Particularly when the reason that you use Airbnb in the first place is because you want sort of a really native local experience. And so I think you're going to see, I think I've tweeted about this like 10 times. I think like a really interesting dark horse acquirer for Foursquare would be Airbnb. I think the synergy between those two products would be really cool. Or who knows, maybe Airbnb will just acquire that data themselves and that content themselves through their hosts and through guests and things like that. But I think the match between those, I think the reach for Airbnb and the local sort of services market is totally untapped. And I think it's kind of just a matter of time before they start to generate revenue from that front also.
All right, that's blog post number 2. It's my second nomination.
All right.
I'm going to have a little clock for them.
All right,
last question. If you could have lunch with anyone in the world tomorrow, who would you have lunch with and where would you have lunch?
Who would I have lunch with and where would I have lunch? Oof. I'm gonna say my mom, because I think she would appreciate it the most of anyone. And where? I don't know. Probably at the beach.
That's a really good answer. Mom's going to appreciate that one.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, Adam, I can't thank you enough for being with me today. For everyone who wants to stay up to date with the work that your guys are doing at Deep Fork, how can they do that? And then how can they follow you in your blog?
Got it. Yeah, so Deep Fork Capital is our fund site. We're doing our best to keep it updated with new investments when they get announced. My blog is ventureminded.me, and then I'm tweeting at Besvinick. Still probably way too much, but if you can tolerate the occasional sports tweet, then stick around.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.